Hey guys, what is up? I'm here to talk about your Friendly Neighborhood Spider-Man episodes 3 through 5. And these episodes were titled Secret Identity Crisis, Hitting the Big Time, and The Unicorn Unleashed. Now, I'm going to save really my opinion as far as the quality of the show for the very end, but just getting into a couple things, just my current thoughts of reviewing the show and thinking about the show as it is right now. So we know that we start off right where we left off with Norman Osborn confronting Peter Parker, and basically we're seeing that the story is unfolding very similar to the way that maybe the original story did, but different characters, different setting, and instead of Iron Man mentoring him, it is now Norman Osborn, but the world itself is different. And so Norman is really taking on the toll of what Tony Stark was doing. And I guess there's a question of, can we trust Norman Osborn? And so that would be my current question of the season, is do we trust Norman Osborn? Does Norman Osborn have good intentions? And if he doesn't have good intentions, what will that lead to? I do think this character could eventually become a Green Goblin one day, but I do wonder if his rise to villainy will be because he's always had bad intentions at heart, or if there's a tragedy in store for the Osborn family. And I will say that the way they handle Norman at the beginning, it does get a little creepy. I mean, just personally, as a teenager, I don't think it would be wise for a teenager to have dinner with an adult by himself. That would be something that I would say is not necessarily the wisest thing in the world. Now, I understand Aunt May probably works really hard to try to support their family, so she's not really up to par with everything that's going on with Peter, and she really has to trust Peter in what he's doing on his day-to-day. But you find out that your kid is having dinner with a grown man by himself and no one's around. To me, that would spark some things of concern. And I think the biggest way to fix this would be having Harry involved much earlier than what he is currently. Now, that's actually going to be one of my positives, but I'm going to get to it later. But I do think Harry was needed in this show way earlier than what he has been as of late. I think he should have been maybe right at the beginning of that next episode where, Peter Parker gets caught by Norman. I think Harry should maybe even have been present in the very beginning, but that's just me. I like the whole idea of Peter trying to find his right suit. Now, eventually, I hope Peter makes his own suit, but the fact that he's trying to find his right suit, I think, it's kind of like it's the classic David story where, the biblical story of David, they're trying to put all the armor on him. But at the end of the day, all he needs is his sling and his rock, and that's what Spider-Man does. All Spider-Man really needs is his web slingers. And, if he has a little bit extra stuff, that's cool, but that's really what he needs. He needs to be him. And so that was really cool. That realization, that whole arc, I thought was pretty good and was good to the story. The people that are working for me right now in this show are definitely Harry, Osborn, and Lonnie. I think Harry really fits, and Harry fits as maybe a good friend for Peter. And so I like that. That makes sense to me. And like I said, I think he should have been a part of the show much earlier and much deeper than what he has. And Lonnie's whole arc is really good. It's the best part of the show for sure. And I think it's probably because it's what the creators care about more. I think they actually care more about Lonnie and Tombstone than they do probably about Spider-Man. Because I will say, watching the show, there's not much. There's a lot of Spider-Man, but there's not a lot of character development going on for Spider-Man. And one of the issues, and one of the reasons I think that is because there's just too much going on, period. There's too much setting up. There's too much layers of different characters here and different places that Peter constantly has to be, that Peter's just the person that's tagging along all the stories to make sure that all the stories coincide. But that shouldn't be Peter's job. Peter's job should be the focus of his story. He should be the lead of his story. And so even though I think Lonnie really works and I think Harry really works, some of these other characters, I don't know if they were completely needed, at least this season. It seems, honestly, like the characters that are working for Harry Osborn, all the different science students in that whole arc, I don't really know if that was needed for this season. I do think that could have been something that could have waited next season, that could have played out over time. That's just a personal thing for me, but that's kind of where I feel about that. Because even things like Pearl's really there just to kind of be a in-between between Lonnie and Peter, but she doesn't really just seem to have anything important going on. And it kind of even makes the relationship between Nico and Peter not as strong. Whereas, Nico probably should have been more involved. And I do actually, now watching the show, and we'll see how time progresses, how they handle her story, but she is a runaway character. And the fact that she's already a, orphan, and she's already in a orphanage, it's a foster care home, I think that already sets up a problem for her character. And they're not showing if she knows magic or not, but I do think that already sets a little bit of a problem for her character. And I definitely think someone like Jessica Jones would have been a much better addition to the story. I don't really know if someone like her was really needed. Like I said, I think Jessica Jones, even comic book wise, they talk about how Jessica Jones had a huge crush on Peter when they were in high school. So I think having someone like Jessica Jones would have been a lot better than Nico, because I do think Nico is going to set up some problems character-wise later on. Could be wrong, and maybe they're just going to totally change the character of who Nico is, which I kind of feel like they've done with a lot of these characters. Which gets into Doc Ock, Doc Ock making everyone's gadgets. Not only can I find that kind of lazy, but I do think, getting to my bigger point, is I do think it eventually changes who some of these characters are and what makes them special. It's like, the character's only special because they have this little gadget and it gives them this ability, instead of this character either has an ability of their own or makes the gadgets of their own. I do understand why it's probably needed for Doc Ock's arc, but I do think maybe making enhancements for characters that already exist would have been more interesting, instead of making their identity solely around Doc Ock. Because when I was watching the show, and this is partly to do with the fact of their choices, the way they want the characters to look. You have some characters that look just like they do from the comic. Like Doc Ock looks like that OG version of Doc Ock. He looks really, really good. But then you have characters like Speed Demon and Tarantula, which, to be honest with you, I had to look that up because I didn't even recognize who those characters were. I had no idea at all that that's who those characters were. And I see that as kind of a problem. Especially as a fan, I think we should be rewarded as fans. And I think that's what you're trying to do. But story-wise, it's making it convoluted and confusing who the different people are. And the one thing that I do, like, and one of the new villains I thought was kind of interesting was the unicorn character. They did kind of a switcheroo where a lot of people were thinking that she was going to be the Rhino character and that they gender swapped the Rhino character. Well, the twist is they actually didn't, and that is a character they're calling now the Unicorn. So they've set up the actual Rhino to be the Rhino eventually. But we'll have to see what they do with that and if that ever comes to pass. I'm sure it will, maybe next season. But, that was an interesting character and an interesting take on that character, making it the Unicorn instead of the Rhino. I thought that was kind of interesting, and the power set was kind of interesting. But you know what it reminds me of? The whole gadget thing? To me, it just is like a copy of Superman, the Adventures of Superman, the new Adventures of Superman, it seemed like they kind of did the same thing, where they took unique, interesting characters and dumbed them down for the current audience and just tied them around the same thing to encompass their story, and not letting them be the unique characters they are, which I find disappointing. And I don't think we don't necessarily need to modernize the characters by making them not as complex or interesting. I think if that's your version of modernization, then you're telling a lazier story, and that's just me personally. Now, the one thing that I think was cool, was the whole idea of Civil War. I do like the idea of them blending in the MCU story with this story and making it seem like what would have been different if Peter Parker wasn't involved. Peter Parker did not go and fight during Civil War in this version. Peter Parker is still in New York. So how did that fight happen? How did those circumstances go? That's kind of an interesting idea. Does the story really play the same, or does Iron Man, win, or does Captain America win and leave with more people than just the Winter Soldier at the end of the Civil War story? Some of those elements are kind of interesting, and I do think it'd be interesting to hear throughout the show little bits of news about what was going on with Captain America. I find that kind of cool and kind of interesting. The big question, though, that I have is, who is this show for? Because to me, this should be a show for my nieces. It should be a show for the younger people to be able to sit down and watch, along with the fans and the nerds that usually would love this stuff. You should make this for kids. And I don't feel like this show, I feel like it's made for kids in every single way besides the language. The language doesn't seem to be needed. The language seems to interfere with it being for kids, which is your biggest marketplace for this show. Now, I know that a lot of parents don't take care of their kids well and just put them in front of a screen, let them watch whatever, and they don't really watch over what their kids are, partaking in. But to me personally, I would prefer a show like this not to really have the language that it has. Now, it's not like it's dropping F-bombs every 5 seconds. It's nothing like that. But language is still language, and when you're using it in a show that probably kids should be watching, even if it's once or twice, I think that's once or twice too much. I do think there's a difference between Marvel movies that we see in theaters and something like this, which should definitely, in my view, be made for all audiences, but specifically for the younger audience. If we want these things to last, we have to make sure that there's content available for kids of younger ages to watch without being told they can't, because the parents who are watching out for them go, you know what, I don't want you watching this because of the language or because of certain things that are in it. And if there was ever a show that should be made for kids, it should be this show. And every element of the show really is made for kids besides that one thing. And so I really wish they would have just been more careful with that, and I don't think it was needed. There's every scene where there's language, you could have just changed the word and it wouldn't have been a problem. So that's just a personal grievance I have, but I just want this to be for kids, and that's a personal thing for me. And the last thing that I would bring up is, what's great about this show is the thing that's actually what's also disappointing about this show is that I actually do like the art style. I don't know if I like the animation still. To me, the animation hasn't really grabbed me, but I do like the way that the characters look and how they look like the OG comic. Like the way the OG comic would look. I like that. I like that a lot. But the problem is that they're missing a lot of the characters from that OG comic that would have made it interesting. Where is my Mary Jane? Where is my Flash Thompson? Where is these other characters? And to be honest with you, I'm okay with some of the new characters being involved. I'm okay with the new Pearl character. I'm okay with some of these new characters being involved. But I would have replaced the Amadeus Cho and all those characters for another season. And I would have had these characters, the OG characters, your Flash Thompsons, your Gwen Stacy's, I would have had them involved in the story much early on. Your Mary Jane, I would have had those characters in the story instead. And I just think it's disappointing that they didn't do that. You know, you could even, if this is supposed to be a really school for really intelligent people, well, where was this old school he used to go to? And where are those old friends? You know, and is Mary Jane still his next door neighbor? You know, those things would have been really interesting if they would have done that. And, you know, I just think it's a missing link. And it's not showing as much true appreciation for that art style that it could have if you're unwilling to show some of those characters in that art style. That's just me personally. I just think it's still a missing link from this show, and I think they could have made it work. I am interested in next week where we're going to have Daredevil. It seems that we're going to have like 2 more weeks of this show because it seems like they're going to be posting more episodes every week instead of just posting one, which is what I thought was going to happen. But anyway, guys, let me know what your thoughts are on this show. Are you liking it so far? Is it really for you? Who is it for? Is it something for you? Because that's the thing too. I don't think it's written well enough to be for a grown adult audience in the purest way. To me, this is something you watch with your kid. But then you can't because of the language, it does kind of cut out some families from watching it with their kids. So, very curious to hear your thoughts. I'm curious to hear what your thoughts are on the villains and the setups of some of the characters. I do think some of the characters are getting set up well, whereas other characters I think are getting left in the burn side. So I'm kind of, curious, or left on the bench, I guess you would say. So I'm kind of curious what your thoughts are as well. But anyway, guys, I'm going to leave it there. Please leave in the comments, let me know what you think. And guys, whatever you're doing, whatever you're going, I hope you're having a good one. Peace.